Welcome back, everyone. Hope you're doing well out there. So in today's video, we're going to be exploring a theoretical topic. So I want to be clear that there's not a lot of hard data on what I'm about to share here with you. This is more conceptual, but I want to start to create this conversation with you about dopamine versus oxytocin and the role that each plays in your mental health, in your personal development, and in your spiritual growth journey, and really starting to see the difference that these neurotransmitters make on how we process and how we understand ourselves and our healing journey. So, again, this is a very deep topic. This is highly theoretical. So, if you're willing to kind of go on a thought experiment with me here, please join me. And just super briefly, I wanted to introduce myself to anyone who is new to the channel and new to me. My name is Dave. Nice to meet you. I'm a coach, I'm a hypnotherapist, and a trained NLP practitioner. And I do psychedelic guide work, psychedelic support work, and general coaching with people. And the topics that I like to talk about here on the channel are kind of this intersection of trauma healing, psychedelic therapy, spiritual awakening, personal development, and how these all fit together. So if you like these kinds of topics, you're in the right place. Welcome aboard. Honored to have you here. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into this fascinating, deep topic of dopamine versus oxytocin. So I'm going to keep it real with you guys here. I don't even know if my brain is up to the task of fully communicating this to you in this video. And this may be a topic that I end up making multiple videos about because it's actually such a deep topic. But I wanted to at least give it a shot here and see if I could try to start to communicate a view that I'm starting to get here about the role of dopamine and oxytocin in our healing process. So a little while ago, about 6 weeks ago or about a month ago, I took a bit of a hiatus from posting on the channel and really putting out a lot of content. I was really busy both with creating content for my course, which, by the way, link below. Highly recommend it if you want to learn how to heal yourself. But also during that time, I kind of started to get into more study, as I'm prone to do, around therapy and healing, and looking at this from different angles, including kind of esoteric spiritual angles, as well as just kind of neurochemical angles, and what the process of healing, as I'm starting to understand it, looks like and is, and how this can be traced all the way back to early life experiences and imprints that involve different neurochemicals and how those neurochemicals show up in the way that we relate to our therapeutic journey. And something started to open up for me. I started to wrap my head around something in a much deeper way, particularly around oxytocin, which I think is, spoiler alert, how it is one of the major neurochemicals that's probably involved in properly rebalancing our nervous system and healing, especially if there's attachment healing involved in your process. And how this contrasts, and I made another video about this, but no one watched it, so here we are, how this contrasts to dopamine and the kind of seeking, longing, chasing, pleasure seeking, quality that we see both in unhealthy coping mechanisms and coping behaviors, but also in this kind of space that a lot of people have, including myself, get into of chasing the next therapy modality, chasing the next piece of wisdom, chasing the next teacher, which perhaps this video and even my channel, my work is a part of that for you. So there's this seeking, craving, longing quality that a lot of us, when we're unhealed, have that's really driven by dopamine. And that's very different, but there's no overlap there. There's a connection point there with the experience of oxytocin, which is probably more how it feels as we heal, at least from my point of view, my experience. So I want to unpack that a bit more for you, but I thought we'd just kind of frame this understanding at the beginning of the video here. So with that being said, let's kind of dive into this a little bit further. So let me start to explain this by just kind of explaining some of my understanding of what self-regulation, healing the nervous system, moving into secure attachment, what that's kind of organized around, what's kind of the fundamentals of that, and how this ties into these neurotransmitters here, right? So first thing I want you to get is that in order to heal properly, human beings need to feel connected. We need to feel connected. We need to feel seen. We need to feel understood. We need to feel like there's a safe space for us to have our emotions and have our process. And what I found over and over and over as a hypnotherapist, as a coach, as a guide, in all kinds of different contexts, when the nervous system gets that kind of input, that kind of communication, the nervous system at a deep level recognizes safety when it's present and will start to open up and move things. And I think this is intimately tied to the attachment system, which is our human wiring for building connections with others, and really how we understand, and the map we have, each of us personally, for relationships and connection and love, and how all of that is understood and processed. Okay. So in order to heal, what I'm saying here is, in order to heal, we need to have a high degree of connectedness and a high degree of feeling safe and feeling kind of like truly that we're connected with another. And that connection, of course, is largely correlated with a neurochemical, which is oxytocin, right? So I want you to think about it like this. When we feel seen and safe and loved and connected and understood, our body generates oxytocin as a response to this. And this is part of the felt sense, the somatic felt sense of recognizing that we are safe, right? That we are connected, that we're felt, that we are cared about, right? This obviously goes all the way back to early infanthood and our caregivers, and whether or not our caregivers were able to effectively send that signal to our nervous system that we are seen, we are cared about, our needs are important, that we will be taken care of, that we are in real time if something comes up, our needs will be met, et cetera, right? So what I'm trying to say here is that I think that this underlying formatting of oxytocin that we're supposed to get in early life makes a big difference in terms of our ability to feel safe and connected, and therefore our ability to open up and allow our nervous system to undergo its self-healing process, if that makes sense. About oxytocin. So, what I've noticed from my own experiences, oxytocin does have a component of pleasure involved in it, right? It feels good to feel seen and loved and connected, but it's a particular type of pleasure. It's like a comfy, cozy, sweet kind of, Hallmark card kind of pleasure, right? This isn't the same kind of pleasure as, a wild night out kind of pleasure. This is that comfy, connected, everything's okay, safety kind of pleasure. But there's a pleasure there, right? And so part of what we're trying to do when we're healing is we're trying to send these safety signals to our nervous system, right? And that regulates things. It creates a sense of connectedness, which again opens this capacity for self-healing that the nervous system has from my point of view. So let's contrast this to dopamine now, right? What I see over and over and over is that when, people are dysregulated, right? When our nervous systems are unhappy, stressed, depressed, sad, anxious, overwhelmed, confused, you name it, right? There's lots of forms of dysregulation. We tend to immediately reach for dopaminergic, dopamine generating experiences. And I think that's because dopamine also involves pleasure, and we're confused fundamentally between what kind of well-being and pleasure we need. So we go to the lowest hanging fruit, which is dopamine style pleasure, right? So that's the Mountain Dew and the Cheetos and the video games and the pornography and the doom scrolling or whatever your form of dopamine seeking is. What I think happens is, for a lot of us, we are unconsciously, automatically chasing dopamine with the kind of implicit confusion or the implicit, assumption that that's going to generate an oxytocin like regulation, when it doesn't, because dopamine is about more. Dopamine is about seeking, not about having, right? Dopamine it's not about connection, it's about disconnection. It's about, I don't have the thing I want, so I'm motivated to go after it, right? But I think dopamine is such easy, low hanging fruit neurologically and culturally that we go for that. And, especially if we perhaps never got that early oxytocin formatting from a safe caregiver, then the best we might be able to do The best we might be able to recognize, rather, is this kind of dopamine form of pleasure, right? But dopamine pleasure is generally not safe. It's stimulating pleasure, right? So this is that, wild night out type pleasure is dopamine, right? Whereas oxytocin is that safe, comforting, connected, brunch with the best friend kind of pleasure. I hope you kind of get the metaphor there. So I hope this is starting to make sense a little bit, right? So this is really important to understand, because I think a lot of times, even with psychedelics, even with like MDMA, even with psilocybin, people get into dopamine seeking in the psychedelic context, right? So think about it like this: if you're chasing insights, that's about dopamine. It's not about oxytocin. And so as long as you're chasing insights, you're going to want more and more and more. The insight isn't going to create that memory reconsolidation moment that, transforms something and rewires something, or that regulating moment of feeling your psycho spiritual cup overflow with safety and connection, which is generally what we need in order to undo the stress that's underpinning whatever our symptoms are. Hope that makes sense. That's a mouthful I just threw at you. Think about that again. Dopamine isn't going to fill your cup by nature. That's not its design. So this, for me, understanding this really starts to reformat my understanding of what we're after in the mental health and the mental healing and the personal growth process, right? What we're after is regulation. What we're after is connection. What we're after is feelings of connectedness that create that stress relieving safety and deep well-being that more correlates with oxytocin. Okay, so that's the first point I want to make. I want to unpack a couple other implications here, because I really think genuinely that this is a very deep, deep rabbit hole that I'm articulating to you. I haven't even thought it through. I'm kind of just thought experimenting here with you in terms of sharing this idea. There's more here, to really unpack. But I want to share with you a couple of the other implications that I've started to see around this. So, like I was just saying, there's obviously kind of an upbringing aspect to this dopamine oxytocin thing, right? There's also probably just the way we started to adapt to stressors, let's say in adolescence, right? So that's often a period where we start to get more into dopamine seeking activities, which is probably healthy and normal to some degree, right? But that's where the gaming begins, and that's where the binge watching TV shows begins, and that's where the, scrolling on your phone endlessly begins, or the addiction to social media begins. A lot of that begins in our teen years, right? And so I think there's something here of, like I'm saying, about kind of upbringing and those years, but there's also a cultural component to this, right? So we can almost think of it like dopamine culture and oxytocin culture, right? And it's really important to not conflate the two, right? So we live in, at least in the West, in modern 2024, Western world, most of the world, it looks like this these days. We live in a culture, or a set of cultures rather, where, you know, the height of the culture and the height of the media we see in the culture is all dopamine driven. It's about seeking, it's about money and status and success and looking amazing, and about having all the things, and about, how cool your lifestyle is, or how edgy the thing you can say is, or how, you get me, right? It's all about dopamine, and so very little about genuine connectedness and deep feelings of safety and well-being. Because let's be honest, that doesn't drive clicks. To some degree it does, but doesn't drive clicks the way dopamine does. And so I think we have a culture, quite frankly, of mostly people with some flavor of attachment wounds and some flavor of unresolved trauma, who are mistakenly going through the same motion over and over and over of seeking dopamine as a proxy for regulation culturally. And the culture reinforces that this is the path to happiness. This is what you're after. What you should really want is stimulation and excitement and seeking, right? Life is about seeking, right? And I think that becomes a feedback loop, which of course, not to be all conspiratorial, but of course, large corporations who are there to advertise and sell you things love, right? Because, you're a consumer if you're in the dopamine loop, right? Dopamine is about consumption. It's about seeking. So that makes you a consumer, right? So of course, we're going to see more media and more messages around that because that drives money, that drives economics, that drives consumption, that drives culture, right? So the dopamine culture generates more dopamine culture. And also, of course, dopamine, part of what's dopamine's about is what's shocking and stimulating, not necessarily what's right or healthy or accurate. So, of course, this also includes a race to the bottom of the brainstem, as they call it, where people are getting dumber and dumber and edgier and more crass and more vulgar because it drives attention and clicking and all that, right? You know this, I know this. It's not news for any of us, right? But it's really important to see as you're healing. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with wanting that stuff. You want to go have a Instagram lifestyle, more power to you, beautiful, right? But it's really important to understand that that's not going to heal you. That's not going to regulate you. That's not going to fill your cup, no matter how much you chase it, in the same way that deep connection and kind of a more oxytocin style way of living is. Okay. So I think that this even goes way back into the roots of the early kind of foundations of Western culture and the values of Western culture, which are all about success, all about excellence, all about achieving, right? Which, again, nothing wrong with that. That's awesome. But the downside to that, the shadow to that, is it formats people's awareness and thinking and biases and belief systems and worldview to be much more dopaminergic in orientation, right? It's all about striving. It's all about doing. It's all about effort and action and achieving and having, right? And that's created a lot of amazing things in our culture. But I think there's a real downside to it, which is that in a dopamine culture, you're going to have mentally ill people because they're psychologically and spiritually malnourished because they're not getting their need for connection met. Conversely, I think there is probably examples in historical record. This is something I need to study more, full disclosure here. So there's a little bit of conjecture and a little bit of theory and not, I can't hard prove this right now, but I think there are probably examples of smaller cultures and civilizations that were more oxytocin driven, where it was much more about connection, much more about deep safety, deep well-being, being nourished, being at peace, being at ease. I can kind of vaguely correlate this maybe to kind of like your quality of life cultures, your Mediterranean cultures, right? Your siesta cultures, your kind of aloha culture, that more relaxed, easy, connected, community oriented, people oriented, well-being oriented lifestyle that looked at a balance of life over an achievement orientation. Hope this makes sense. This might be reaching a little bit, and feel free to call me out in the comments below and let me know if you disagree. But I think there is another type of culture that is organized more around oxytocin and connectedness. And my hunch here is that in this other way of approaching culture, if we had a culture that emphasized mutuality and connection and support and well-being, we probably would not have a mental health crisis inside of that culture. In fact, probably what we'd have is a lot of people who are deeply fulfilled, who are less driven to be consumers, who are more driven to be participants of the culture in a contributing way, who are grateful and felt safe and felt a lot of like well-being, right? So I think this even reaches down into the roots of the value system of the culture we're in. What's the quality of the water we're swimming in? Is it warm or is it cold, right? And that's something, if you're a fish, you don't think about that often, probably. You register it, sure, but you probably don't think about it. But I think it's worth talking about. So in some sense, from this cultural angle here, I think when you go on a deep healing journey, it starts to undo some of the cultural conditioning around dopamine culture. You have to be willing to recognize that dopamine seeking, as cool as it is, as fun as it is, I do it too, I get it, is not it's just not the path that leads to what you need in order to heal, which is much more like oxytocin, right? And that means to some degree letting go of the desires and the biases and the assumptions and the kind of presuppositions we carry about chasing our dreams or chasing our hedonic, impulses, and recognizing that that has to die a little bit for you in terms of importance. Doesn't have to go away altogether. I think it's important. I don't think you want to have no seeking circuitry. I don't think you want to have no dopamine driven striving. I think that's probably not healthy either. But we want that in good balance with access to well being, with access to safety, with access to connectedness, to feeling loved, to feeling seen, to feeling held and cared about. And it's the kind of the wholeness of that that probably makes for like really thriving culture and healthy human beings. But I would argue if we had to pick between the two, probably an oxytocin culture, a more nourishing, kind of mothering, loving, safety oriented culture, accepting culture, probably would generate more mental health in people, even if it created less economic prosperity in people. So that's the cultural angle here. I'm going to just summarize this for now because this video is getting long and we can explore it more. But I just want to start to get you thinking about this with me and create this kind of thought experiment together. So let me summarize this and then we'll call it a video. Okay, quick summary here, and then we'll wrap the video. I realize this is a bit far out and more of a thought experiment, and you may or may not like this kind of thing, but I thought it's a compelling, kind of interesting point. I see something here in this that I think is worth communicating about, and I don't see anyone else talking about it, so I figured why not offer it up to you? So just to summarize here, first point I want to make is that oxytocin is correlated with co-regulation, and co-regulation is strongly connected to processing and healing emotions and stress and improving your mental health, right? So we're wired from birth to need co-regulation in order to feel safe, and safety generates the neurochemical in the body of oxytocin. So there is a component here of oxytocin being more closely related to what it feels like to heal than dopamine, which is what most people seem to be engaged in when they're in their coping behavior, seeking kind of strategy, right? So that's the first point. Second point is that, um, you know, dopamine is kind of a cultural thing that's largely connected to the roots of some of the ideas of our civilization, at least in the West here, and also with modern consumer culture, modern kind of marketing. I think we've been largely socially conditioned into a dopamine seeking culture that does not deliver mental health and deep well being, right? But nonetheless, that's a paradigm we're in, right? So, the other point here is that you have to, as you're moving into your healing path, recognize that you're going to be unplugging from dopamine culture to some degree. It doesn't have to be all the way, but to some degree to access what you really want, which is this feeling of deep well-being. Okay. In correlation with that, healing involves releasing stress, and when we have these safe inputs, this sense of connectedness that correlates with oxytocin, the nervous system has this ability to kind of unlock itself and start to move that stress and process that stress through and heal when it recognizes it's in the presence of safety. I know that sounds weird. I get it. It's not rational or logical, but it's what I've observed over and over and over, that there is this kind of unconscious ability to self-heal that emerges in the recognition and the felt sense of a safe container of like really attuned, skillful, safe connectedness. Okay. So I think there's a self-healing mechanism, and I think we're all wired to do this. And I can explain it more. It's in my course, by the way. That's there. That's a mechanism that I think science hasn't fully measured or described yet, but it's a thing. Okay. It's certainly a known thing in the somatic therapy world and the hypnosis world. Last point to make is that, dopamine culture, oxytocin culture, dopamine as a formatting, way of learning to access pleasure in yourself. oxytocin as a formatting way of accessing pleasure in yourself. I think it's really important to know the difference. I think it's really important to understand that when you're in a dopamine seeking mode, you're barking up the wrong tree if what you want is to heal, if what you want is to transform your core issues and let go of the trauma, let go of the stress, and truly regulate and rewire your brain. Rewiring your brain is going to involve these oxytocin signals, I think, much more than these dopamine signals. Last point I want to make here is that dopamine seeking isn't bad necessarily. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying know its limitation and don't expect from dopamine seeking what it can't deliver, which is this feeling of feeling deeply safe and connected and nourished and emotionally, comfortable and balanced. Okay. So I'm going to wrap it here, but I want to know from you guys, do you think this is crazy bullshit? Am I just talking out my beehole here? Do you agree? Do you see what I'm seeing here? Do you disagree with some interesting counterpoint? Do you have science or study you can link me to that kind of echoes what I'm saying here, etc.? Let me know what you think down below. Leave a comment. Let me know what hit home for you here. And if you like this kind of content, if you want me to explore this topic in more depth or in other videos, let me know, because I don't know if you don't leave a comment or if you don't, do something to let me know that this video hit home for you. So with that being said, much love to you. I hope you're doing well, and I'll see you guys in the next video.